Hello. It's something when a sharp, successful black woman just trying to travel gets openly mocked by some power-tripping airport employee right there for everyone to see. No one had a clue what was about to unfold. They figured a little sneer, a quick seat shuffle, and her pride would just vanish. What a mistake. They didn't realize who they were dealing with. She was the quiet thunder they never anticipated. Before that day ended, some folks would be looking for new jobs, old ways of doing things would be shattered, and a quiet kind of justice would prevail. You'll want to hear how this one woman took a moment of deep personal insult and turned it into a wake-up call that sent ripples through an entire industry. Friends, what I'm about to share isn't just some tale. It's a real look at how inner strength and the fight for what's right can make a difference, often in those everyday places we don't think twice about. If you're new here, I'd love it if you'd say hello and tell us where you're joining from in the comments. And if stories that hit home, make you question things, or just get you thinking are your thing, maybe hit that subscribe button and the little bell. We try to bring you stories that matter every single day. So glad you're here. All right, let's dive in. The first light was just starting to paint the huge windows of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, giving the busy terminal a kind of soft, almost tricky peacefulness. Olivia Hayes stood near the entrance to Gate 17, a picture of calm and style amidst the morning rush. People hurrying to their next flight, announcements echoing, and the steady hum of suitcase wheels on the shiny floors. She held the handle of her dark brown leather suitcase a little tighter, almost like she was bracing herself against that familiar feeling of being out of place. This whole scene wasn't new to her. Olivia had been through so many airports all over the world for years. Each one had its own little games of who's in charge and unspoken judgments. But this particular day, it felt off. There was a tension in the air, something you couldn't quite see but definitely could feel. She was dressed perfectly in a classic navy trench coat, a tasteful silk scarf adding a touch of quiet elegance. Every bit the high-level professional she was. That is, until she spoke. The second her clear, subtly accented voice asked the gate agent to confirm her boarding, the atmosphere changed. The agent, a woman named Karen Baxter, according to her name tag, let out this short, breathy laugh. It wasn't a friendly laugh, it was colder, the kind that hovers between fake politeness and pure spite, like a hidden jab. Karen's eyes quickly scanned Olivia, her face, her skin, her confident way of holding herself. "Well, that's some accent you've got," Karen said, her voice trying to sound casual but dripping with a hidden put-down. She didn't even pause for Olivia to say anything. You could almost feel the other staff nearby tensing up. Little whispers, smirks they tried to hide like they'd already decided something about Olivia before she even got to the counter. "Looks like there's been an adjustment to your seat," Karen went on, her fingers tapping away at the keyboard, pretending to be concerned. "Seems you've been moved to economy, seat 35B. Olivia felt her own heart rate steady, not with alarm, but with the cold, sinking feeling of understanding. "I had seat 3F booked," she stated, her voice even, refusing to match the sudden hostility. Karen's smile got a little tighter. "Oh, sometimes the system just updates itself. Probably just a mistake in the original booking. Happens more than you'd imagine." The excuse sounded rehearsed, like something from a customer service manual, but the nastiness underneath was plain to see. The people waiting in line behind Olivia started to get restless. Some were stretching their necks, trying to see what was going on. Others just seemed annoyed. A couple of them grumbled about being held up, shooting Olivia that quick, irritated look people give when they think someone's messing up the smooth flow of things. A chill went through her, but it wasn't fear. It was a stark realization. This wasn't some random mix-up. This wasn't really about a seat assignment at all. No, this was about a judgment made in a split second, a sizing up of her worth that had nothing to do with her ticket or reservation, but everything to do with the color of her skin and the way she spoke. As Karen turned to help the next person in line, some guy in shorts with a crumpled ticket, who she greeted with a cheerful, no-questions-asked attitude, Olivia's kept her eyes fixed on her. It hit her then, something even worse than being openly turned away. It wasn't loud or rude on the surface. It was calculated, smooth. A tiny, almost invisible shiver went through Olivia, a mix of quiet fury and a sudden, sharp understanding. She drew herself up taller, feeling the weight of her own past. Every little slight, every dismissive look she'd ever faced, now feeling like armor. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. "Is there a manager I could talk to?" Karen's eyes narrowed, her lips pursing slightly. She fiddled with her earpiece, calling someone with that over-the-top patience of an employee dealing with what they clearly thought was a nuisance. Olivia's simple request was met with slow responses, a deliberate show of unconcern, like just dealing with her question was too much trouble. The minutes ticked by. The line behind her got more agitated. It wasn't until a younger employee, Daniel, she heard his name mumbled between them, came over that Olivia saw a tiny bit of what looked like shame in his eyes. He spoke so softly, but Olivia heard him clearly. "They don't want you in the front." He'd said it's not good for the airline's image. They'd rather you were, well, not so noticeable. For a second, Olivia Hayes just couldn't catch her breath as those words sank in. But her expression? It didn't change one bit. Not then, anyway. She just gave a small nod, like she understood. Her quietness, though, was sharper than any angry words could have been. It wasn't the silence of someone giving in. It was the silence of someone thinking, planning. A storm was brewing, and it felt like no one in that whole airport, with their quiet little laughs and fake smiles, had any idea it was coming. As she stood there, just waiting, her phone gave a little buzz in her pocket. She peeked at it. A planned message from her executive assistant. Just one word on the screen, "Set." The very edge of her lip twitched, just barely. Not a smile, but a look of pure determination. She knew deep down that this wasn't just about her being personally shamed. It was like holding up a mirror to all the ugliness hidden behind those shiny company fronts. And as the airport buzzed around her with people just going about their day, as the speakers called out boarding groups and the staff at the counter basically ignored her like she was just a bother, Olivia felt something change in the air. It was tiny, like a ripple just before a big wave. But it was definitely there. The trouble had started, not with yelling or pointing fingers, but with a look, a smirk, and a total underestimation of a woman who knew all too well how the world tried to make people like her disappear. Quietly, neatly, and with a smile. By the time they finally called her name, almost as an afterthought, just a last check of the passenger list, Olivia had already made up her mind. There wasn't going to be a big scene, not there, not then, but things were in motion, and someone was going to pay for the casual cruelty of that morning. Once that storm started, it wasn't going to be stopped. Not this time. Olivia Hayes sat straight up in a hard plastic airport seat over by the far wall of gate C-17. The loudspeakers droned on with the usual stuff. Final calls for flights heading to places a world away from the sterile hallways of O'Hare. Her dark brown leather suitcase sat right by her feet, its smooth leather a quiet sign of her position in life. A position that, in this place, had been brushed off as easily as if she were just some random passenger hoping for a seat. But it wasn't even being bumped from first class to economy that filled her with that slow-burning anger. It was the whole network of hushed warnings and the way everyone just clammed up around what was happening. She watched Karen Baxter, the gate agent, as she kept on with her duties. That plastic smile of hers stretched tight, almost like you could see her own prejudices weighing it down. Olivia saw the little looks between the staff, the way they shuffled their feet a bit when passengers complained about the issue at the desk. Even the people who looked like they might have wanted to say something, who maybe could have questioned Karen's rude attitude, they just looked away, their faces showing how uncomfortable they were. Staying quiet was the easy way out here. A wall to hide behind so they didn't have to admit something wrong was happening. A flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, walked past. Her eyes met Olivia's for just a split second before she quickly looked away. She seemed a little tense, and she started walking faster, like putting distance between herself and the scene could somehow protect her from it. Olivia's eyes followed her, noticing how, even for those who probably knew it was unfair, the pressure to just go along with it was too much. Sarah's hands were shaking, just a tiny bit, as she straightened her uniform collar. A little movement most people wouldn't have even seen, but Olivia saw it. She saw everything. Daniel, the younger staff member, the one who'd seemed unsure earlier, went back to the counter. He spoke quietly to Karen. Olivia couldn't make out his words, but she could see how tense he was, the little frown on his face. His whole body just screamed that he didn't want to be part of this. But his mouth was forming those quick, practiced sentences, spitting out the excuses they'd probably drilled into him. Just doing what I was told, Olivia imagined him saying. That's the protocol. Karen's reply was a tiny headshake, her lips pulled into that tight little smile of someone who knew exactly what role she was playing in all this. Her voice got just a little louder, sickeningly sweet, but you could still hear the sharpness underneath. Just drop it, Daniel. It's not worth making a fuss. Olivia felt that knot in her own chest get even tighter. It wasn't just Karen, it was the whole chain of command, the whispered instructions, the unspoken agreements, the silent teamwork that let this kind of thing happen so smoothly and cruelly. Even as she sat right there in plain sight, her very presence a quiet challenge to how she'd been treated. The whole system just kept grinding on, not missing a beat. Other passengers looked away from her. Airline staff fiddled with their scarves and name tags. The line of travelers kept moving, everyone eager to get away from the awkwardness of a confrontation. A woman sitting across the way, a traveler who looked to be in her middle years with a fancy purse at her feet, stared at Olivia for a long moment before quickly looking down. Her lips were pressed together in a thin line, like she knew something wasn't right. But then her eyes darted back to her phone screen so fast it was almost like she was trying to save herself from getting involved. It wasn't that she was mean, Olivia realized. It was that she was scared. Scared of getting mixed up in something that might mess up her own comfort, her own sense of safety. The security guards standing near the big glass doors of the terminal just watched, their faces showing nothing, their hands resting near their belts. No one called them over, not because there wasn't a reason to, but because this whole drama was wrapped up in that silent agreement to look the other way, never quite crossing the line into an open fight. Their being there was just a reminder, a visual cue that power was always close by, ready to be called on with just a look or a whisper, and that silence, when it becomes part of the system, is as strong as any direct order. Olivia's phone vibrated again. Another private message popped up on her locked screen, a quiet signal from her assistant back at her main office miles away. The message was short, a code, but she knew what it meant. Things were moving forward. She took a slow, deep breath, letting it fill her lungs. This wasn't the moment to make her move, not quite yet. She was taking it all in. Who did what? How they acted. The payback she was planning wouldn't be about losing her temper. It would be precise, built on facts, like a carefully constructed case. Sarah, that young flight attendant, hesitated again as she walked by. She almost stopped, maybe to say something, anything. But then you could see her just fold. The unspoken rules were too strong. She hurried off, head down, her silence almost deafening. Olivia's gaze followed her for a moment, then flicked back to Karen Baxter. Karen was now chatting with a man in a suit holding a regular ticket who was clearly feeling entitled. With a soft laugh and a few quick taps on her keyboard, Karen moved him to a better seat. Olivia clocked every bit of it, the easy rule bending, the special treatment, and filed it away. The gate area was noisy with final boarding calls, a fake cheerfulness in the air as people grabbed their bags. Olivia Hayes just sat there, calm and strong, a steady point in all that indifference. Even as the line thinned and the agents got ready to close up, she didn't budge. She wasn't going to be brushed aside that easily. Daniel came back to the counter, looking drained and pale. He shot a glance at Olivia, guilt all over his face, but didn't say a word. His silence said it all. Olivia met his look, a quiet understanding passing between them. She didn't need him to speak. She'd seen enough. When the last few passengers were gone and the terminal quieted down, Olivia finally stood up, picking up her coat with slow, deliberate care. She'd let them think they'd won, let them believe she was just going to market. They had no idea. They thought her quietness meant she'd given up, completely underestimating the strength she had. Olivia walked calmly to the counter one last time. Karen looked up, her smile looking fragile, ready with some last empty phrase. But Olivia spoke first, her voice low but carrying a clear promise of something much bigger than an argument. "I really hope you're prepared," she said softly, "because this whole thing doesn't just end here at gate C-17. And with that, she turned and walked away from the place that had tried to make her invisible just a short while ago. The hushed warnings, the silent agreement to look the other way, all of it was about to fall apart. They just didn't realize it yet. That tension under the airport's smooth surface wasn't just a little disturbance. It was a crack about to split wide open. By the time Olivia Hayes was out of sight of gate C-17, a quiet shockwave had already started to spread, and there was no stopping it. From a distance, the airport kept up its usual show. Announcements, rolling bags, polite chatter. But up close, behind the counters and the uniforms, things felt different. It wasn't just an incident, it was the start of a real reckoning. Daniel, the young staffer who'd weekly tried to voice his unease, felt himself spiraling. Back at his small desk, his hands shook as he tried to work. But his mind was stuck on Olivia's composure, her quiet exit, and the heavy feeling of what was now in motion. The system he'd believed in suddenly looked flawed. His training hadn't prepared him for the weight of being part of something so wrong. Elsewhere, Karen Baxter's professional mask was starting to crack. After Olivia left, she tried to go back to her duties, but she kept replaying the encounter. Olivia's steady voice, her unwavering gaze, those parting words. Every click of her keyboard felt wrong. Every smile to a passenger forced. She'd seen bias before, but never had it come back at her so fast. Her own actions now felt like splinters under her skin. Sarah, the young flight attendant, stood at the far end of the terminal, her hands clasped tightly. Regret washed over her. She'd seen it, done nothing, and her silence now felt suffocating, a heavy guilt gnawing at her. Olivia's dignity had shattered her own flimsy excuses. Meanwhile, in the operations office, the shift supervisor, David Miller, watched the monitors with a growing sense of dread. Nothing formal had been reported, but the whispers were spreading. He knew this wasn't just some passenger causing a fuss. The situation was unraveling, and the system was stressed in ways he hadn't foreseen. Meanwhile, Olivia Hayes had made her way to the VIP lounge, not really to relax, but to watch. Phone in hand, she was scrolling through messages from her private contacts. Lawyers were chiming in from different cities, logistics people were getting statements ready, and travel partners were starting to quietly hold off on deals with the airline. Every message was a careful move, like pieces being placed on a game board where everyone had totally underestimated her. Olivia's face showed nothing, but her mind was cutting through all the fake calm of the airport. And as time ticked by, that superficial order at the airport started to wobble. The big terminal screens flickered, passenger lists flashed oddly. The line at the check-in desk got longer as Karen Baxter fumbled with doing things by hand for flights she used to manage with a click. Daniel overheard worried supervisors muttering about system glitches and big mistakes. Karen's hands were visibly shaking as she tried to keep it together, but the weight of everything was too much. She felt like Olivia's presence was in every problem, a ghost in the machine she couldn't get rid of. Sarah, the flight attendant, kept glancing towards the gate agents like she was hoping someone, anyone, would finally speak up about what happened. But nobody did. The silence just got heavier, thicker, and that's when it hit her. Something Olivia had probably known all along. The real sting of unfairness wasn't always in the loud, obvious acts. It was in the quiet agreements. Those times when people just looked the other way, when rules were written to protect silence instead of the truth. Over in the staff break room, David Miller, the supervisor, was pacing, phone glued to his ear. He was desperately trying to get through to his own boss, but the line kept dropping. Messages weren't getting answered. Word was starting to get out about unusual delays. Olivia's influence, even though no one could see her, was now very real. It wasn't just about her company making legal threats or the risk of bad press. It was that slow crumbling of trust. Karen, Daniel, Sarah, they all felt that crack under the surface of their once orderly world. The silence that used to shield them was now trapping them. Olivia's departure hadn't been a surrender. It was like an earthquake, and the aftershocks were now spreading out, shaking not just the gate or the terminal, but the very foundation of how these quiet injustices were allowed to happen. As those cracks got wider, the big question wasn't if the system would break, but how soon and what the fallout would be. As daylight faded at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, that fracture under its polished surface just got deeper. By mid-afternoon, the systems that usually ran so smoothly were sputtering, overloaded by all the hidden disruptions. Urgent emails from regional offices were piling up in executives' inboxes, unanswered. And underneath it all, people were starting to realize that the quiet woman they dismissed hadn't really gone anywhere. Olivia Hayes had just changed her game plan. From her private office in downtown Atlanta, Olivia's team was coordinating their response. They weren't being loud or dramatic. Instead, they moved with that same quiet power she'd shown at the airport, a steady, deliberate use of influence. Calls were made to pull business from the airline, meetings were silently canceled, and big blocks of expensive reservations were frozen with simple, one-line emails. No angry statements to the press, This wasn't about public shaming. It was about making the system answer, done with surgical precision. Back at the airport, Karen Baxter got called into a last-minute meeting in a room with glass walls overlooking the runways. She walked in clutching a notebook, her nerves shot. David Miller, the shift supervisor, sat across from her, looking pale and tired. Behind him, two serious-looking men from airline headquarters listened silently. "We need to understand what happened here," one of them said, his voice controlled but sharp. "The seat change, the overrides, the whole mess. Was it a mistake?" Karen's voice shook as she started to tell the story. Olivia's arrival, her ticket, the smirks, the whispered jokes. As she spoke, bits and pieces of how everyone was involved came out, like shards of broken glass. The way everyone just went along, the decisions made in hushed tones, the little compromises of integrity. But for the first time, Karen wasn't just making excuses. There was a real regret in her voice that made her words sound raw. "We were just doing what we thought was normal," she mumbled. "But we didn't stop to think about what it actually meant." Outside that meeting room, Sarah lingered in a service hallway, her thoughts heavy. She watched families at the gates, kids with teddy bears, business people, tapping on their phones. And seeing all that normal life just made her own silence feel even worse. She hadn't spoken up. She'd chosen to be comfortable instead of brave. But the look on Olivia's face, so calm, so resolute, it haunted her. It was a reminder that silence is its own form of agreement, and that if she wanted to make things right, just feeling bad about it wasn't going to be enough. Back in the operations center, Daniel was staring at a console, his heart racing as he watched the system failures get worse. Supplier codes were airing out, boarding lines were reassigning on their own, and priority systems were being flagged for review. Daniel watched the systems he knew so well start to glitch and fail, one after another. He saw error messages he'd never encountered, and realized this wasn't just a couple of servers acting up. This was something much bigger, a deliberate and precise dismantling. It was a sinking feeling, realizing the airline's whole operation, something he'd trusted, was actually so fragile when faced with someone who knew how to push back, quietly but firmly. He finally pushed away from the console, a knot of fear and a strange kind of awe in his stomach. The next few days were a blur of hushed meetings and panicked calls across the airline. The incident at Gate C-17, initially dismissed as a minor customer service issue, had cascaded into a full-blown operational crisis. Olivia Hayes' name was never mentioned in the official internal memos, but everyone knew. Her quiet departure had indeed been an earthquake. For Karen Baxter, that meeting with the people from airline headquarters was just the beginning. The investigation laid bare the casual discrimination, the standard practices that were anything but. She wasn't just fired. She became a case study in what not to do, her career in that industry effectively over. The swagger she had at the gate was gone, replaced by the hard lesson of underestimating a person's dignity. Sarah, the young flight attendant, actually found her voice. Haunted by her silence, she made a formal statement about what she witnessed, not just about Olivia's treatment, but about the culture that allowed it. It didn't fix everything overnight, but it was a start, for her and maybe for others. It cost her some comfort at work, some sideways glances, but she said it felt like the first honest thing she'd done in a long time. David Miller, the shift supervisor who'd been scrambling in the operations office, found himself caught in the crossfire. He wasn't directly involved in the initial incident, but the subsequent chaos and his inability to contain it or even get clear answers from above put his own job on the line. The system he was part of had failed, and he was one of the faces of that failure. And Olivia Hayes? She never sought a public apology or a dramatic showdown. Her team simply continued to apply pressure through official channels and business networks. The airline, bleeding money and credibility, eventually had to do more than just issue a quiet settlement. They were forced into a top-to-bottom review of their customer service protocols, their staff training, and their internal reporting systems for discriminatory behavior. Real changes were implemented, slowly, painfully, but they were changes nonetheless. So you see, that one moment of quiet humiliation at an airport gate didn't just fade away. It sparked a reckoning, a reminder that true strength isn't about being the loudest in the room. Sometimes it's about a resolve so deep and a strategy so well played that it can shake an entire industry to its core, all without raising a voice. Goodbye.